Do I take this one? Yes, hello. Good morning. My name is Martin Kölling. I'm with the German financial daily Handelsblatt, and I will be the moderator of today. Today it's my pleasure to introduce two of the longest serving car analysts, I think, in Japan already. Christopher Richter with CLSA and Koji Endo now with SBI Shoken, SBI Securities. They will talk to us today about electric vehicles, especially the position of the electric vehicle industry in Japan. Japan is a leader in hybrid vehicle development, but it's, according to many, it's a laggard in electric vehicles. And today I hope we find out where the Japanese car manufacturers position themselves and what their plans are to catch up with the crowd. So first, Chris Richter will give us a short presentation of 10 to 50 minutes, then Koji Endo will follow. But before they start, I would like to remind you to put your mobile phones to silent mode or switch them off altogether out of courtesy to our guests. And now, please give our guests also a warm welcome. Correct. And now I would like to give the floor to Chris Richter. He has a presentation. The presentation is already up, and let's hear what he has to say.
Thanks for the warm introduction, Martin. As Martin said, I'm Chris Richter. I'm the Deputy Head of Research at CLSA here in Tokyo. I also, in my spare time, covered the Japanese automakers, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Suzuki, etc. And I have just I'm going to run through some slides very quickly on just the state of the EV industry globally. This slide shows seasonally adjusted annualized sales for the global EV market. You can see that between 2020 until the end of 2022, this market was really roaring. In 2022, it was about, including PHEVs, about a 10.5 million unit market, or 13% of global sales. The other thing you'll notice that it was the EV market hit a speed bump as we got to the end of 22 and went into 23. This slide shows where EVs are sold globally. You can see for the last 3 years, China has really dominated the equation. About 2/3 of EVs in the world sold last year were sold in China, followed by Europe, a little bit in the US, and not very much anywhere else in the world, including Japan. This slide shows monthly EV sales in China. You can see things were going very smoothly there until the end of 2022. This is this in EV sales suddenly slowed down. That's why the global SAAR of EVs has slowed down. And so really it's China that's pulled down the global EV market as we've entered 2023 as subsidies ended. Nonetheless, China has fantastically high share of EV sales. In 2022, EVs were 26% of the market, and now the last month's figure, they were about 27%. That's really higher than anywhere else in the world. This shows that we are starting to get some concentration in EV sales in China. Really, the name to watch is BYD, which is about 1/4 of the Chinese market. And I would argue this is the maker to watch for the rest of the decade. Besides leading the Chinese market, it's also a leader in lithium iron phosphate batteries, which avoid the high financial cost of nickel and the high financial cost and the high social costs of nickel and cobalt. Indeed, BYD's recently entered the Japanese market with prices that are about half of the comparable Tesla, Toyota, and Nissan vehicles. Here's the second largest EV market in the world, Europe. On this slide, I've broken up low-emission vehicles in their share in the market into BEVs, PHEVs, and hybrid vehicles. You can see that hybrids are still the leader. That's been good news for the hybrid Meister Toyota motor, and it's given it a lot of European market share in recent years. That said, if you put BEVs and PHEVs together, it's a lot more than hybrids. Europe has been interesting because they've had plans to completely ban internal combustion engines by 2035. That's met some 11th hour challenges from Germany and a number of other EU governments. Germany has been leading this charge, arguing that internal combustions with vehicles using carbon neutral fuels should be allowed. It looks like the EU Commission has backed down. This had included hydrogen internal combustion engines. That's why I put the picture of the Toyota race cars powered by hydrogen there, at least before it caught on fire. And so I would say there's probably a slight advantage to Toyota, which has been keen on hydrogen ICEs, but I would anticipate that would be a very small amount of the carbon neutral market. Here's the same share breakdown that I showed you for Europe. This is in the case of the United States. This is the third largest EV market in the world, quite a bit smaller than China and Europe. The U.S.'s market is interesting because it's had until at least the start of this year very little in the way of regulatory pushes for electrification. So maybe this is an example of what a vehicle market would look like without regulations pushing it. It's interesting that battery electric vehicles have organically passed hybrids in the last several months, maybe a wake-up call to Toyota Motor. The most closely watched thing in the U.S. has been the Inflation Reduction Act. For automakers, the prize is getting a U.S. $7,500 tax credit provisions. And the act has a lot of provisions to localize productions, such as the EVs themselves, the batteries, and battery components and materials. Makers have been rushing to establish local EV production, and they found some loopholes, but raw materials are harder to achieve. This is the high hurdle to meet battery sourcing requirements. Japan actually scored a victory here the other day with a sort of a mini free trade agreement established between the U.S. and Japan for processing of battery materials. Japan doesn't dig a lot of battery materials out of the ground, but they are starting to process quite a few. Toyota's equity affiliate, Toyota Tsusho, recently established a processing facility for lithium hydroxide in Fukushima Prefecture, and I think we'll see more of this. I think this is the hardest hurdle for makers to meet, and especially since a lot of the battery materials come from what the U.S. calls markets of interest or entities of interest. I forgot the exact phrase, but China certainly dominates processing of lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, really key materials in anybody's electric vehicle. I'll dwell a little bit on one of the smaller EV markets, but one that we all care about, Japan. Japan is, you can see here that they really dominate to the point that you can barely see the contribution of battery electric vehicles and PHEVs. So in the next graph, why don't I get rid of the hybrids for a couple minutes and just show BEVs and PHEVs. You can see that they have really taken off our BEVs have really taken off. And in a way, it's nothing to do with anything that Toyota, Honda, or even Tesla are offering, but it's because of the mini electric vehicles being offered by Mitsubishi Motors and Nissan, the Nissan Sakura and the Mitsubishi EK Cross EV. Here's a picture of these two cars. You can see they were co-winners of Japan Car of the Year award. They're much cheaper than big battery vehicles like the Tesla Model Y or Toyota BZ4X or Nissan Ariya. Featuring much smaller and less costly batteries, they're aimed at lower income rural communities where most people don't have access to public transportation and live in single family dwellings, charge at home. Actually, I did a long drive of the Mitsubishi version last year and I thought it was great. The inspiration for these vehicles comes from China, where the top-selling vehicle in the Chinese market has been the Wuling Huangguang Mini, another low-cost vehicle, actually lower cost than these, and it's dominated sales for some time. EVs have had a great run. Let me address some of the risks to adoption. I think the main risk is affordability, and this is driven by battery prices. While the battery prices have come down a long ways, you remember back when Nissan and Tesla were first starting in EVs back in 2010, batteries were more than $1,000 per kilowatt hour. But now they've come down a lot. But that said, we saw the first increase in prices in 2022, and this had a lot to do with the pricing of raw materials. Here's a graph I'm showing you of lithium carbonate prices, which went up a lot last year. It's come down recently on the back of EV demand falling off, largely because of what's going on in China. But bear in mind, even though lithium prices are off 30% this year, they're still 6 times higher than they were in 2021. And I would argue that probably as EV penetration increases and the slow development of new lithium resources, that this graph will begin to go back up again. So raw material prices are going to be an issue. Raw materials are, but of course, you hear various numbers, but one source I follow says that they're about 56% of the cost of the battery, which is a dominant part of any EV's costs. As I mentioned, the time to develop resources takes time, and I think that there is a possibility we could have a lithium crunch in the towards the end of this decade and into the next decade. I've spoken to a few lithium mining people, and they tend to support this. This has led for automakers to become miners, besides trying to achieve local production of lithium resources in America, with GM, Ford, and Toyota investing in lithium resources in Nevada. Tesla is close to acquiring a resource in Brazil. Toyota, of course, has a large resource in Argentina, and Chinese companies have extensive investments in Australia and Chile, probably the world's best lithium resources. Another risk for EVs is they're not yet very green. This is a graph from the IEA, which looks at sort of the full life cycle emissions of different types of EVs. You'll see that for battery vehicles with large batteries, the hybrid or the CO2 emissions are similar to hybrids. The issues though are different. There's a lot of carbon intensity in mining, which people are probably going to expect the EV industry to fix at some point, and of course the electrical generation, which is not green in a lot of places. So you can see that with the risks surrounding EV affordability and carbon intensity, you can sort of understand why makers like Toyota have been slow to jump into EVs. Speaking of the Japanese makers, and I'll conclude here, I think there's some considerable efforts to catch up. Our top buy Honda has 2 BEV plants under construction in China. These will be dedicated plants, which I think will be good to allow them to optimize the design. An interesting JV with Sony, GM, LG Energy Solutions, and more. They're promising us 2 million autos and 3.5 motorcycles by 2030, and they promise that they're going to be all electric by 2040. So while they're way behind, they have big ambitions to catch up. We rate deep value Nissan a buy, mainly for the deep value, less about anything they're doing on electric vehicles. They're focused on solid-state batteries by 2028, hoping to get rid of cobalt and nickel, and they're aiming for cost parity with hybrids and by 2026 and battery electric vehicles by the 2030s. Very challenging goals. We rate Toyota and outperform. 3.5 million units of autos, all Lexus by 2030. I think selling 20,000 EVs last year, they're going to be hard-pressed to do this. They are reportedly working on a second-generation BEV platform by 2026. Their big goal is to achieve cost parity with Tesla. So anyways, I'll stop here and turn the microphone over to Endo-san.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And now, Endo-san.
Okay, so welcome to the event, and my name is Koji Endo. I'm working for SBI Securities. Used to be called SoftBank Investment, but at this point we have nothing to do with SoftBank at this point. And then I started our research department about 7 years ago with about 30 people nowadays working for me, each covering different industries. As far as I'm concerned, I cover automobile, auto parts, and space. Why space? Well, nowadays you started seeing flying cars. That's why there are going to be a whole bunch, well, actually, series of IPOs coming out, expected to come out in the field of space related. But anyway, I'm going to turn to 65 years old in 10 days. So out of 65 years, I've been covering the industry for about 40 years. Well, what a boring life, but anyway, that has been the case. Well, as I was actually go through this my presentation today, but again, Chris just covered almost the whole thing about the EV industry. So maybe I'm gonna switch to something else. I just came back from Thailand, Bangkok, actually 2 days ago. I spent a week in Bangkok because they had the Bangkok Motor Show, which takes place every March. But again, because of the travel restrictions, this was my first overseas trip in almost 4 years. So I compared this time event in Bangkok with the event 4 years ago, and there has been a huge difference that I witnessed. Now, we're talking about Thailand, we go to Southeast Asia, including Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. This market, Japanese almost controls like 90 to 95% of the market. The top player has been Toyota, and also Isuzu, and Honda, and Mitsubishi, and Nissan. Almost everybody plays in each of those Southeast Asian market. But again, Toyota being the most powerful maker. Well, generally speaking, in each of those kind of big events like Motor Show, and especially in Bangkok, at least up to 4 years ago, Toyota was at the center with the biggest booth, kind of biggest area for the exhibition. And right next to Toyota, there's Isuzu, or Honda, or Mitsubishi, and then all those Japanese probably must have occupied like 70% of the space anyway. Now, I visited Bangkok Motor Show a week ago, and I was really shocked because the biggest place or the biggest booth was BYD, not Toyota. Well, Toyota has still very big space for the exhibition, and Toyota price was very popular. But again, in terms of the space, in terms of the size of the space, BYD was the biggest. And 4 years ago, there was no BYD. And right next to BYD, there was MG and GMW, or those Chinese EV makers. all kind of having or enjoying a big space, actually bigger space than Honda, bigger space than Nissan, bigger space than Mitsubishi. So at this point in Thailand, Japanese controls 95% of the market, and Chinese has probably only 1 or 2% of the market share. But by looking at this motor show, I thought, well, 5 years from now, something could happen. Because again, at the Toyota's booth, there were 2 EVs. One is BZ4X, and the other was a kind of a concept model of pickup trucks. But that's about it. If you go to BYD, obviously there were like 24 EVs. And at MGs or at GMW, there are again dozens of EVs. And actually the place, all those Chinese places are packed with visitors. Yes, Toyota was very popular. Isuzu was okay, but when I visited Nissan or Honda, I won't say it was empty, but again, at least apparently less popular than those Chinese rivals. So it really suggests that at this point it's a dominant, well, it's dominated by the Japanese. But again, upcoming 4 or 5 years, we could see some big change, especially by looking at or considering the fact that those 3 Chinese are now building their plants very close to Bangkok. And those 3 EV plants are going to be completed by the end of this year, and they're going to start making all those EVs in Thailand. While, as far as I know, no Japanese has going to have exclusively EV plant in Thailand. So Toyota or Honda or Isuzu has a plant to start making EVs sometimes in the future in Thailand, but it's probably years away. So, but the fact is, in Thailand, entire Thailand, there are only 1,000 charging places. So it's going to be very difficult for those EV owners to drive around freely throughout Thailand. Yeah, that's probably impossible thing to do, even though they maybe can charge all those their cars at the house. But still, if they cannot really have enough access inside, outside their house, well, it's going to be very, not really convenient, obviously. But again, Thailand government is now willing to give all sorts of support, incentives, including tax reduction and some subsidies and so on, so that maybe the ownership rate of EVs is probably going to go up. During this 7 days stay in Thailand or in Bangkok, I saw 2 Teslas. So I think the new wave is about to come. And I really felt that all those Japanese makers have to be kind of really well prepared before it's become too late. But at the same time, having said that, there has been completely kind of different way of direction, especially in Western Europe. Now Germans apparently has decided to kind of change their mind, and they will kind of reschedule the timing of banning the ICE or hybrid vehicles in EU. Instead of 2035, well, they continues to use their conventional engines as long as the main fuel going to be e-fuel. But again, it's probably just the beginning. I won't be surprised if there's going to be another change in the rule that, well, maybe we can drive PHEV, for example, sometimes. Or maybe the timing of banning all those hybrid and ICE could be 2050 instead of 2035 or whatever. So once there's a kind of leeway or a small hole in that supposed to be a very rigid, strict rule, once that happens, it's going to be very easy and very short, very fast to see that whole rule going to be collapsed. And actually the Germans are taking the initiative, and that's a very, very big event. So it could be. Toyota is now saying that they want to sell from diesel and gasoline and a mild hybrid, a strong hybrid, plug-in hybrid, EVs, hydrogen, FCV, blah, blah, blah. Everything they are ready. Well, I'm not really sure if they are ready, but at least they are willing to have everything in their route. And that's probably the case. If that's the case, maybe they might be more flexible enough to face, act against whatever the rule going to be changed. Because obviously, if Biden administration is replaced by Trump, obviously the environment-related fields, policies in the United States are going to be completely 180-degree changed. So you always have to be kind of prepared to act according to the change in the politics, because what Toyota is now competing against is not really the Chinese rivals, maybe not really the European rivals, but actually all those government policy, and which is really strongly tied with employment and taxation, and obviously election. So if that's the case, maybe Toyota is competing against politics in Germany, in EU, in the United States, not really directly against those Chinese rivals. And that's the kind of difficulty that Toyota is facing at. I have to really give credit to some of those makers. Well, it's going to be very easy to say that Toyota is well behind, blah, blah, blah. And I've been hearing that this new president of Toyota, Sato-san, is now ready to come up with revised, updated electrification policy in April. And that could promote at least a little bit more electrification at the Toyota than Akio Toyota. We don't know yet. But at the same time, I think they are desperate in bringing up all those new technologies and new vehicles. But again, going back to the story in Bangkok, I think all those Japanese has to be really quick enough and well prepared before or they get too late in this race. And then at the same time, some of the Japanese probably, could disappear if the current strict green-related policy is going to continue in some of the selected countries like China and so on. So this visit, the first visit in 4 years in Bangkok, really gave me a kind of completely refreshed and new kind of insight and thoughts that how those Japanese are going to compete against all those rivals. And that's probably very, very urgent thing to do. But anyway, I think we should welcome all the questions. That's probably more interesting and important anyway.
Yes.
So, yeah.
When you're finished, thank you very much.
Thanks.
For your presentations. I'm looking forward to questions from the floor. I don't know whether we will have any questions from the online audience. Yeah, please, you. Can you please go to the microphone and introduce yourself by name and affiliation?
I didn't use
Hello.
any of mine.
This is Etienne Balmer from the AFP, French press agency. I think you both tackled directly also the subject, but my question is, what do you think about the current stance of the Japanese car makers? You know, that that strategy of not putting all their eggs in the same basket, basically. Do you think it's a more risky bet, or do you think it's a safer bet? Thank you.
Who wants?
I'll give my perspective, and I'm sure Endo-san has his own. My view is it's good to have more than one basket, because I did highlight some, and so did Endo-san. Endo-san highlighted there's political risks out there. I highlighted that there's raw material shortage risks out there. Affordability so it's good to have more than one basket. So the way I view what Toyota, Honda, Nissan, others do with hybrids, for example, that's a great hedge. because I think the EV industry will hit some enormous speed bumps in the coming years. And if you're all EV, you could be putting your franchise at great risk. That said, it still has to be EVs first. So it's, the problem is you do have this dynamic tension. You do, and you do have to show that you are committed to doing hybrids. So some of the statements that came out of Toyota when Akio Toyoda was running, was CEO, were, sort of made it sound like, no, hybrids are going to be there forever. No, it's something that it's your standby thing. It's your hedge. And so, the hybrid, or excuse me, EVs have to be first, but it's really great to have a hedge of some other technology going forward, because some of the issues that we've both highlighted could come and bite you really hard ultimately. Now, at the end of the day, if global warming, climate change is real, the effects are going to get worse with time. So, at some point, all this noise is going to go away, and there will be a demand, to, have zero emissions. So that's going to come. It's never going to go away. But in the meantime, having a couple things in some other baskets is not a bad idea.
Well, since I did not use any of my PowerPoints, well, let me use the first one. This is the chart or graph that shows there among those 25 different major car makers around the world, their share price performance during 2022. And as you can see, the worst performer include Rivian, NIO, Tesla, and Fisker, happen to be 4 EV makers. The worst. And then which was followed by like Volkswagen, Ford, GM, kind of what they call legacy big US and European makers. And many of the Chinese, like Shanghai Motor, Guangzhou Motor, Dongfeng Motor, the BYD, they all fell rather substantially. Now, red lines are the Japanese. So Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, Subaru, and Mazda, other things. Well, their share price declined, but at least on the relative basis compared to other rivals in China or the US or Europe, their performance was not as bad as theirs. Again, I repeat, the worst performer came from EV makers in 2022, when 2022 was supposed to be, at least at the beginning, supposed to be the kind of initial year for the EV sales expansion around the world. But it seems, at least the majority of the investors around the world didn't give that credit to EV makers in 2022. I think it's very kind of interesting. I mean, NIO came out with that 500,000 yen of small cars, but they are now heavily losing money. Tesla is doing just fine, but even though they missed their sales target, and then at the same time, well, this Elon Musk's play with Twitter gave some negative impact. So it's not necessarily entirely Tesla's own kind of a mistake and so on. It's something else has been kind of impacting on Tesla's share price. But anyway, that was the third worst performer among those 25 major car makers around the world. So I think it's very easy to say that on EVs and EVs and EVs and without EVs, you're out. Well, that's not really the case. You're going to make money. So that's the point. Now, as Chris said, I think it's a good idea to have a couple different shells in your pocket. And you have this, and you have that. Again, it's very clear that EV doesn't work in Japan unless the government decides to open up and build 3 dozen of nuclear power plants. In China, it's completely governed or kind of orchestrated by the government anyway. And then in EU, as I just mentioned, Germans have started talking about something else to change the rule. So that's why you have to be flexible enough and probably has to have a number of different options to face with possible future changes in the regulations, future changes in the policymakers' idea, and again, the recent unfortunate dispute between Russia and Ukraine things are now making a big difference on the Germans' idea between 2020 and 2023. But anything could happen under the current war situation. So my idea is, again, probably they have no choice but continues to make a big progress in the EVs. But at the same time, that's probably not really the only option that they have to have. Maybe they should have something else as well.
Martin?
I'm Martin Fritz, working for the German business magazine Wirtschaftswoche. My question, Chris, you mentioned that Tesla is the benchmark for Toyota building EVs. What has prevented Toyota from reaching this benchmark in the last 5-6 years? Did they just ignore it, or did they didn't recognize the challenge? What were the reasons, and how do you rate the chances of actually reaching this benchmark by 2026, like Koji Sato said? The same question to Mr. Endo, please.
My view is that when Toyota developed the ET-NGA platform, they were anticipating that they were going to be, that it was still going to be something of a niche technology, a niche car type, and they wanted to make it alongside everything else they make. And of course, Toyota has a huge portfolio of internal combustion engine cars, of hybrids, whatever. And so they saw the most economical way to do it was to build it alongside them. Of course, once you decide that, and you're not like Tesla anymore, you're not a pure play electric vehicle maker, you do make some engineering trade-offs. Now, as Toyota's looking and seeing that a substantial portion of what they're going to have to sell by the end of the decade and beyond will have to be EVs, they're saying, oh, we're not going to be that competitive with Tesla, which is the top of the market, and we got to do a rethink of what we've done. And so so the thing is a lot of it comes down to where can you find the most efficiencies. Toyota eventually originally thought that you could build everything together, and now they're thinking, okay, we need something more dedicated to be fully competitive with Tesla. And I've seen quotes in the papers, singing praises to Tesla's giga casting and some of the simplifications they make in the design. And of course, that's the advantages when you work with a blank sheet of paper. Of course, Toyota's got a very thick book of stuff that they that they've accumulated in how to build cars over the years and how to do these, to do manufacturing with multiple ones. So it's it's a difference in where these makers are coming from, and a difference in the perception of where the EV market was going to be going. And I think maybe it surprised Toyota a bit that that the amount of EVs that they would be making by decade's end was going to be a lot larger than they had originally thought.
Okay, this handout slide shows Tesla's earnings pattern in the last 10 years or so. And as you can see, in the last 14 quarters, they've been making money, 14 straight quarters. And their OP margin now is running around 15%. 15% OP margin. Well, in case of Toyota, it's probably 8-9% at this point, and in case of Honda, just by looking at the automotive division, the margin is going to be like 2%. So compared to those, well, I must say, Tesla is doing a great job. Elon Musk has been amazingly coming up with a whole bunch of new ideas and so on. So, well, Tesla is selling Model Y, Model 3, Model S, Model X, those 4 models, but again, 95% of the fleets are Model 3 and Model Y. And Model 3 and Model Y share the same platform. So what I'm saying is that they sold 1.4 million last year, and they are aiming at 1.8 million this year. But practically speaking, 1.8 million is based on just one platform. That obviously gives a Tesla very high efficiency. And then at the same time, practically speaking, Tesla doesn't have any shops. Almost 100% of their fleets are sold on the net basis, so they don't have any salesmen asking you if they want to buy Model Y or Model S and discounts or something like this, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really happen. And then they have a unique business model called over the air. So after shipping their new model to the customers, they continue to charge customers with relatively high price bill, like this autonomous drive things. That's going to cost you something like $10,000. And then whenever they upgrade all those devices, where they again charge you $3,000, additional $5,000, blah, blah, blah. That never happened at kind of all those legacy companies. So I must say, in terms of production side, in terms of marketing side, in terms of all those kind of business model itself, I think I must say, Elon Musk has been very successfully came up with a whole bunch of completely new business model and new ideas that we have to give credit. Now, having said that, how long does it gonna continue? I mean, Tesla's market cap is about 3 times bigger than Toyota's. So in terms of market cap, Tesla is the biggest in the automotive industry, followed by Toyota. And then third biggest is actually BYD. And fourth biggest is Volkswagen. And fifth, I think, is Mercedes-Benz. But again, by far, the biggest is Tesla. And Elon Musk's attitude is not just playing a game in the automotive side. His idea is to have a better environment standard, environment communities around the world. So his intention to expand the sales of battery business and even all those solar related, or some of the generators they are now promoting very aggressively, and then heat pump that they recently came out. And then at the same time, he recently came up with kind of humanoid robot called Optimus. He said this Optimus business, this humanoid business is going to be in the future bigger than car business. And then he's been investing a lot in the SpaceX, other things. Everything gonna aiming at the end of the day, aiming at the better environment and greener world and so on and so on. And that's kind of his idea. Car business is just a part of it. So that kind of attitude, I think, what all those conventional or legacy companies probably have a lot to learn. Again, most of those legacy companies have been sticking to just the manufacturing side and production side, and maybe a hardware side, and continues to kind of sell all those with heavy discounts under the normal circumstances. But probably that kind of new, kind of outdated business model has to be changed. So it's not just EVs against ICE or EVs against hybrid. It's kind of business model, completely different business model, and what for that business model is implemented. Well, that source of the kind of philosophy and ideas that sort of kind of element that the Elon Musk is chasing. Well, I don't care what he does with Twitter. I don't care. But other than that, I think we have, all those legacy companies have a lot to learn. That's my honest, frank opinion.
First you, and then Peter. And then I have one online question, then you.
Hi there, my name is River from the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much for the talk today. I wanted to ask a little bit more on your take on the combustion engine news out of Europe. You hit on this a little bit, Endo-san, but do you see this kind of precipitating a wider movement globally on loosening electric vehicle targets? And what is your take in general on the market for e-fuels and the potential there? Thank you.
Well, e-fuel, the prime market for e-fuel is not automobile. It's for the airplanes and ships. So they're going to be a hugely bigger market for those two areas rather than the automobile. That's one thing. But at the same time, as I just mentioned earlier, it's a big change initiated by the Germans to change the basic rule to ban the entire ICE or gasoline and diesel and hybrids out of the EU by 2035, and that has been completely changed. Once you have some leeway and some more room to escape from that rule, then the whole idea and whole rule gonna have a chance to collapse. So yeah, as far as this e-fuel is concerned, it's gonna be very expensive at this point, like 3 to 5 times more expensive than the regular gas. And energy efficiency is like 1/5 of the EVs. Still, in terms of technology, it's extremely difficult. And then it's extremely costly to have a plant to make or combine actually hydrogen with CO2. So it's going to be very costly operation. I'm not really sure how many people really want to use e-fuel to drive their car, even though I expect the price to come down maybe substantially at the end of the day if this market really expands for the airplane or transportation and the ship transportation, and the market is hugely bigger, let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, then obviously the price of e-fuel has to dramatically drop. But still, at the end of the day, maybe it's still costly, maybe 2 to 3 times more expensive than the regular gas. So if that's the case, I think it's not really true that because of this e-fuel introduction, people, increasing number, many people are going to start using this e-fuel. That's probably will not really happen. But at the same time, as I said, instead of completely 100% banning all the ICE and hybrids out of the market, you have something that you still can sell your conventional engines by using this e-fuel means a lot for many car makers. Again, there could be some more changes coming out from Europe or maybe from some other countries, because again, automobiles, Germans, obviously has a big influence in the automotive world. So if that's the case, some of the developing countries could change their mind also. And in their market, instead of banning all those ICE and hybrid by 2030 or 2035 or 2040, really depending on which country you're talking about, maybe that's not necessarily the right thing because the Germans are changing the rule. So I think this could have a big impact than many people might think on other developing countries, on other makers and so on. So yeah, for the conventional makers, legacy makers, gasoline and hybrid makers, this might be a good at least a thing. but again, there could be some kind of substantially more byproducts to be generated by this change by the Germans. I think.
My take is the regulators, made a big mistake, is they overextended regulation. And basically, the Germans and, the other countries that joined them, Italy, Hungary, Czech, Poland, they forgot about two things. One, EVs have an impact on jobs. And for elected officials, jobs are paramount. The second thing that they're forgetting about is EVs are not very affordable. If you are a rich hedge fund manager living in, Greenwich, Connecticut, EVs are great. If you're a working class individual living in Poland, they're terrible. And so you take away the ability for personal car ownership. I've done statistical studies where I've broken down Europe, and you look at, the sales, the market share of like BEVs versus hybrids, and it was very clear to me, at least, that if you look at the richer places like Germany or markets where there's big subsidies like Norway, yeah, EV share is very high. If you look at places like Poland and Hungary, hybrid share is very high. So basically, consumers care about affordability. Consumers care, and citizens care about jobs, and the regulators, basically said, oh, we're going to set these rules and you guys, clean up the mess without dealing with these issues. And the risk is that, other governments that have put in, ICE bans like California, like the UK, the thing is that when it comes down, it's very nice to say this in 2023, we're going to do this when you get to 2030 and there's a big economic impact, there is the risk that you risk having what you've accomplished being reversed unless you do something to address these issues. And and that's what we're not seeing from the regulators, is how do you address the issues of jobs and affordability?
Peter Lyon with Forbes. Thank you for your presentation today. It's very, very enlightening. I was just wondering how our speakers might read what's happening at the Japanese car makers right now. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen the changing of the guard. We've seen Toyota, Subaru, and Mazda. They've all announced they will be bringing in new CEOs in the very near future. And those three companies, Toyota, Subaru, and Mazda, only have one EV each at the moment. And we don't really know where they're going with their EV policies right now. I was just wondering, do you see this changing of the guard, do you see it as an attempt to change the mindset inside the companies and their investors and shareholders? And do you think it is an attempt to catch up with the EV market?
My take is there's a little bit of that. I mean, certainly Akio Toyota made comments that, maybe I'm outmoded or from another generation, need a fresh set of eyes on the process. So there is a little bit of that. And so, you may be getting some of that. There is probably some worry. Are we, because you're constantly being battered by, being behind in EVs. You're being battered by complaints from ESG investors that you're not paying enough attention to this market. You have people saying you're not looking at. So, but at the same time, these are still all very conservative companies that are not going to, that will extend a bit of what they're doing. But I don't think they're going to jump in. I don't think it's going to be always evolution, not revolution, with any of these companies or any of these new CEOs that have been put in place. I mean, Sato was, Akio Toyota's right-hand man. I think they think in very parallel lines. The changes of the guard at Subaru, Subaru, Mazda, I'm not of the impression that it's a complete revolution in viewpoint. They will evolve.
Okay. So this chart shows you that the total profits or profitability of those Japanese car makers And 6 passenger car makers combined, that is Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Subaru, Mazda, and Mitsubishi, Suzuki, 6 companies, their combined profit trend along with Toyota's share price from 1992. As you can see, the first peak was seen sometimes in 2003, 2004, 2005, when the margin hit something like 8 or 9%, and then collapsed during the recession time after the Lehman shock, and then stayed there at a relatively low level as yen hit 75 yen back in 2012 and 2013, and then started coming back. And then second peak was seen in 15 and 16, 2015 and 2016. The margin came back to the previous high, and then started coming down again because of the COVID-19, and then now recovering a little bit because, again, temporal weakness of the yen against US dollars. So up and down, up and down. And Toyota's share price, was also up and down, even though their share price hit the record high, historical high, about a year ago. Toyota's share price was historical high. But again, now came down a little bit. And as you can see, their highest point was still like 9%, 8% in terms of margins, while Tesla is now making 15%. And I'm not really sure if this profitability or trend is going up or going down. It really depends on the global market, especially in the United States and China. But demand in the United States and China seems to be not that strong, and actually has been kind of relatively weak, well, partly because of the shortage of microchips, but partly because of the recession risk, especially in the United States. And then yen, last year, 140 to 150. Now, at this point, it's about 130, 132. So, and then there has been a kind of mounting overhead cost, especially as under this inflation period. So, R&D cost is higher, and capital expenditure is now getting higher. Labor cost is higher, and all those materials costs are higher. Everything is going up. Well, it's not just unique to the Japanese. Almost every conventional legacy makers in the United States and in Europe are kind of facing a similar pattern. But and then, obviously, as I just mentioned earlier in the beginning of this event, there are lots of newcomers in this market, especially from China. So going forward, they're going to be, well, people say, well, they're going to be the biggest risk in, or biggest change that those Japanese are facing, the biggest in 100 years. That's what they say. Right? So by going into, or at least we just probably stepped into a completely new era, and which is probably enormously difficult to manage. And under that kind of situation, as Toyota said, well, I'm the old man, and I'm just cannot really manage all those new era, and I just passed to Sato-san. I'm not really sure if Sato-san is the right person, but at least he might be more willing to take responsibility in the research and development and marketing side of EVs and electrification, which Akio Toyota was not necessarily open-minded. So we are. It's I think very clear that we are entering into a completely new period with a lot of new challenges going on. So happened to be Toyota, happened to be Mazda, and happened to be Subaru, all changing their heads. And it's very interesting that in case of Toyota, from Akio Toyota, it's obviously from the family, Toyota family, to Sato-san, who has been a kind of top engineer in the Lexus division, and he has been very aggressive in terms of promoting the EVs. and electrification at his Lexus field. And Mazda is very interesting that they are switching into Moro-san. He is kind of marketing guy, has nothing to do with technologies. And especially he has been managing and successfully changing the direction of their U.S. subsidiary and made the U.S. Profitable instead of continuously losing money years ago. So different company has a different kind of area to change or improve. But again, I think at least much younger than I am, younger those generations are taking over all those big companies. And that's probably a necessary thing to do. So.
Can you stay for 2 questions?
Sure. I don't know. Endo.
Okay. Sure. Okay, then the 2 last questions, first online and then you have the last question. Here we have an online question by Walter Sims, Straits Times. Could you give your take on the potential and the weaknesses of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as compared to conventional EVs? Do you foresee a day when hydrogen fuel cell vehicles might surpass EVs?
Okay. My view is like, as it stands right now, EVs are ruling the roost. We've said that we've replaced, what was it, the age of the century of internal combustion engines with EVs, or we're heading in that direction. Sometimes I think, though, it might be like the EV half century instead of the EV, like the ICE century. The reason is that interest in hydrogen, green hydrogen, is rising worldwide for a variety of applications. For things like steel making, storage of renewable energy, a lot of other things. But I would say probably, is it a technology of the 2020s or the 2030s? Probably, maybe it's a technology for the 2040s or the 2050s as hydrogen resources get better developed. It's an open question. By that point, though, maybe EVs are so thoroughly entrenched that it just won't be possible to change at that point. The nice thing about hydrogen is it does come with a few less of the raw material problems that batteries have. That said, building a fueling infrastructure is difficult. I would say for companies that have been fans of hydrogen, like Toyota, I don't think that they talk a bold talk about it, but they don't do a lot to support it. I'll tell you why I was thinking this. The other day I was talking to Cummins, the big diesel maker in America, and they recently a couple of years ago, they bought a company because of their interest in fuel cells, but they also noticed that they had a business in electrolyzers. Electrolyzers are the devices that take water and turn it into hydrogen and oxygen, and they said, well, actually, this business is more interesting because we can make money. Fuel cells are a technology for the 2030s and beyond, but electrolyzers, we can make money right now. And it sort of makes me wonder, is like, for a lot of Japanese companies that, there's a lot of companies worldwide that are investing in technologies to make green hydrogen, but there's not a lot of emphasis in Japan. And what's interesting is, an electrolyzer is a fuel cell in reverse, and it's surprising that some companies that have been keen on hydrogen, like Toyota, haven't taken the jump to promote hydrogen production in that way. But just the short, to make a long story short, though, is hydrogen, if it becomes a dominant technology, is a long ways away. Most of the best applications of hydrogen are not in transport, maybe with the possible small exception of heavy trucks. But the best applications are in storage of renewable electricity, making steel, and other applications, sea transport and things like that. Probably not in cars.
Well, as Chris mentioned, hydrogen is not for individual, personal passenger car use. as far as I'm concerned, hydrogen's problem is infrastructure. So how to make all those hydrogens and how to transport all those hydrogens. And if we are thinking of the hydrogen stations like gas stations, well, that doesn't really work. But at the same time, it's also true that hydrogen might be appropriate for a long distance logistics or transportation from A to B by big heavy trucks. So the idea is they're going to build a big hydrogen station at the beginning, the start point of Tomei Freeway, like between Tokyo and Osaka. You're going to have a big hydrogen station in Tokyo and Nagoya and Osaka. And by using this Shin-Tomei freeway expressway, and one lane going to be occupied by that particular commercial use. And basically, all those big heavy-duty trucks, maybe 3 or 4, going to be connected, and there is no driver. And autonomous drive going to be applied so that these 3 or 4 trucks, big trucks, going to transport from Tokyo to Nagoya and from Nagoya to Osaka. All you need is a big hydrogen station at the Tokyo and Nagoya and Osaka. Once those big trucks reaches Nagoya station or Osaka station, then all those baggages and some big materials areas gonna be divided into smaller trucks. And then those smaller trucks, like last 1 mile, distribute all the things to the other places. So actually the government, or maybe Toyota, along with some other like hydrogen makers, now thinking or doing research and development of improving that. The cost is, again, at this point, very high because, again, infrastructure-related costs are very high. Again, it's unthinkable to use hydrogen for individuals' retail purpose. But again, it's probably appropriate for big transportation companies to deliver from Tokyo to Nagoya, from Nagoya to Osaka by using these autonomous technologies. That's probably the case. That might be happening, might not be happening at this point, I don't know. But that's probably the case.
Okay, last question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Sayumi Take from Nikkei Asia, and thank you for this presentation. It was really interesting because coincidentally, I published a story just yesterday featuring Mr. Koji Sato. So for those of you, if you're interested, please take a look. My question is about the government's role in spreading EVs. My take is that government policies are playing quite a huge role in China, Europe, the US. And here in Japan, I hear that automakers like Toyota are, I guess, lobbying or influencing government policies. So my question is, do you think the government should do more top-down policies to give a boost to EVs? Or do you think it's more of the companies that should take the initiative? Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I did read your article yesterday. That was a good piece of work. Thank you for that. My take is that, first off, I think you're right. EVs are largely driven by government policy. I think that explains a lot of first off, the disparity and, why China and Europe are the biggest EV markets in the world, because that's where they've had the most support, and why hybrids are very high in Japan, but EVs are very low. And similarly in the U.S., the penetration of EVs is much lower than in China and Europe. So it's really something that's being driven by regulation. It's not being driven by demand, really. I mean, there's always technology first adopters, but I think most people, vote their pocketbook. And EVs are more expensive. I talked earlier about affordability, and so I think really to be successful in the long term, governments have to go further than just saying, "Thou shalt make EVs." They have to address these subsidiary issues of employment and affordability if they want this to happen. And certainly it's going to be a long haul, because there's a lot of resources are a big problem for EVs. I showed you a graph earlier where the price of lithium went way up. Granted, it's come down 30% this year, but that's only with 13% penetration of EVs around the world. What's going to happen if we get to 20, 30, 40%? And so, that could result in EVs becoming quite expensive, and governments, governments, by just simply mandating, you're going to make this many, you're going to be all EVs by this date or something, risk a very severe backlash when that comes to pass, and people find that they can't buy a car, or, because it's too expensive, or, people lose a job, because they used to work in an engine plant or something. So, I think governments have to, governments have been too simplistic, and they have to look at the package of things. I don't know if it's solely up to automakers, because, right now this is something that is not in their economic interest. We saw some share price graphs up there, and that, some of the Japanese makers have been relatively speaking great performers, while they've been, avoiding the EV question. So, if you want this to happen, really governments have to take the lead here.
Again, I mentioned earlier that this automobile industry, generally speaking, with the possible exception of the United States, auto industry is probably the biggest industry in each of those major countries, including Japan, China, Germany, Italy, France, blah, blah, blah. So the biggest means, in terms of the impact on GDP, in terms of the tax revenue, in terms of the employment, all those things. In Japan, for example, automobile industry is called like 10% industry. So it accounts for 10% of the GDP, 10% of the employment, 10% of the tax revenue, blah, blah, blah. But there's even more important thing is that auto industry has a even greater impact on other industries. So that what we call multiplier effect. So if automobile industry produces 10, then at the end of the day, the total impact is going to be about 30 to 35. So if I say 10% of the GDP directly comes from auto industry, well, if we include indirect impact means on the steel, electronics, chemicals, and all those things. Then the total impact is going to be about 35%, or 1/3 of your GDP and tax revenues and employment all comes from automobile related. So if that's the case, and actually that the impact is actually bigger in Germany or Italy or France than in Japan. If that's the case, I think it's very reasonable to expect that each of those countries' government want to protect their own automobile industry, right? Because again, employment means most likely, tax revenue means most likely it's the number of voters. So those people are going to vote for you if you protect them. So which means that government tries to keep those in order to promote their industry and GDP. But at the same time, it's going to be very important for those government to have those voters. So that's one of the reasons, I think, that the Germans changed their mind to include this e-fuel. And then it's also true that many of the developing nations, like India or Thailand and so on, or for all those countries, well, in India, it's not automobile industry, the biggest GDP contributor. It's a farmers or the agriculture, but still, automobile is big and actually getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If that's the case, their priority is probably to put some policies which are going to be favorable for the auto industry. Obviously, they have to care about the pollution and so on and so on. But at the same time, regulations, government regulations, in many cases, going to lead technological revolution. So the combination of those two. But the basic idea is for each of the government, auto industry is very important to protect them. So that's the kind of idea. So to answer your question, well, obviously all those companies, each company has to make great effort in coming up with new technology and so on, and promote EVs. Yeah, that's very important, I think so. But at the same time, it's also important for the government to introduce some policies to promote all those kind of environmental friendly things, but at the same time promote all those companies' development or growth in their own countries. And those two sometimes conflict to each other, but sometimes go along to each other. And that's the kind of difficulties that each government has to face. But what I'm saying is that good or bad, in many cases, automobile industry is very, very important for those each of the government. If that's the case, well, they have maybe no choice but to promote their own country's automobile industries, and that's probably almost always the case.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, very enlightening. And it is common in our club, we also prepared a one-year honorary membership, and we hope, of course, that you use it quite often and come to visit us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.